So we've had a request to explain a bit air conditioning, how the air conditioning system works. Now, if we're going to use uh, air conditioning ATA21, the question is, first of all, what are we conditioning? So we're conditioning bleed air, ATA 36. So these two ATA chapters come hand in hand. I don't like that red ink, so I'm going to change it to like I don't know why it started with red ink, but there you go. So what we're going to talk about today is how we get to how we get to the stage to produce enough air to be able to condition it at the right temperature and pressure and conditions for the passengers inside the cabin. So bleed air comes from the engine. So if we just draw an engine here, sort of like this, and usually air will go through the engine and gets compressed um, to further down the engine you go, the more the the higher the pressure. So let's say, for argument's sake, if this was, let's say, a three stage, like some manufacturers would have the low pressure here, low pressure of compression, the intermediate pressure here, and the high pressure here before it gets compressed so high that it gets ignited here and pushed out the back. Okay, so I usually take air around about the fifth to seventh stage, depending on engine, depending on manufacturer. So I would take air, tap off air from here. And I also take here through an HP valve, um, which can be selected on or off. Select air from this stage around about maybe between 10th and 12th stage, depending on, as I said, depending on the manufacturer. So we, how am I going to draw this? Let's say like this, and then here I've got a check valve. Okay, so I've got a check valve here to stop the higher pressure going into the lower pressure area, and I just take my air here. So this one, this air will modulate itself depending on aircraft speed, let's say. And this one is an on-off valve, which will usually close in cruise where the aircraft spends 99% of its time in flight. So the objective is we're taking hot air up here as long as we can control it for temperature, and we can control it for pressure if we give these signals to a computer to do it for us, or B as feedback, okay, to a sense line or a solenoid or whatever. We can then control electrically a valve here. Let's see, try and do some fancy work now. Okay. And let's call this, since it's pressure and temperature, a PRSOV, which will not only control the temperature and pressure, it will also regulate it. It will also shut off if the pressure is too high. Okay. So as we progress further, now we have pressure regulated and temperature controlled air, and we can tap off again. Let's say here we'd go to the starter air valve to start the engine. And eventually end up at the top of the engine is the pre-cooler. This is in the pylon strut, depending on which manufacturer you use, and this will be regulated at about 200 degrees Celsius and 35 to 40 psi on a running engine continuously and delivered then to the aircraft. Okay, so here we have our bleed. Now, let me see if I can choose another picture. All right. So, start at the top this time. For our pre-cooler with 200 degrees, 35 to 40 psi pressure coming from the pylon and going into, where would it go? First place it would go into, it's delivered to the, let's make some dotted lines here. This is the aircraft belly area or air conditioning area, where we have a thing called the pack. Okay, here lives the pack. And funny enough, if we got two engines, we got two packs. For the left one for the left engine and one for the right engine. So we have pre-cooled, we have bleed air at this temperature and pressure from the left engine, and bleed air at this temperature and this pressure from the right-hand engine. Two packs where, first things first, we go into a flow control valve. Okay, if you want a flow control valve, what does that do? Regulates the flow. Now, how does it regulate the flow? Well, in the cockpit here, just think of your car and your air conditioning. What do you do in your car? You do two things. You select how much air. So you've got 3 or 4 settings with the fan, with the amount of air coming through, and there's another selector which selects the temperature exactly on the aircraft. So in the cockpit we have a one control knob for the flow. Okay, and this one will tell the flow control valve how much air I want to come into the cabin. All right, and then the temperature, we can have, let's say, I'm going to use three. I forgot to tell you, the flow control valve would go through a computer, which because we have, let's say, two sides. So when we call it a, I don't know, a flow control box, pack box, whatever you want to call it, flow control box. And then we have, well, another computer here. we already have in cars, you can select the temperature in two areas, the driver, the co-driver. The back can have a different temperature adjustment. So we've selected our aircraft. There's three temperature selections, one from the cockpit, one for the forward area of the cabin, and one for the aft area of the cabin for temp control. And we're going to call it a temp controller. These demonstrations are generic. They uh, for the basic principle of the issue. We don't have anything specific in mind, but you can see, depending on if you're a Boeing person or an Embraer person or an Airbus person, you can assimilate with some of the boxes or the acronyms. They are just for the purposes of bringing this across. So this temp controller will each control knob will go to a uh, trim air valve. One, trim air valve two, and trim air valve three, which we'll see later on. Okay, so now I'm gonna try and use some color just to try and explain, since we've got the luxury of it. So here, our our air is hot, 200 degrees coming here, and then we put it through a turbine, heat it even more, funny enough, and then we bring it through two stages of cooling via a heat exchanger. Heat exchanger one, heat exchanger two, and then what comes out of it is air. So let's go through the motions. 200 degrees air comes in at 35, 40 psi. It gets heated even more, then gets cooled through Byron heat exchanger, gets cooled even more. And the funny thing is, at the exit of the heat exchanger, or the second heat exchanger, the air is around about 0 degrees, plus or minus 10 degrees. Still 35 to 40 psi, but super, super cold. I'll just put some colors in there as well now. So this one is still hot. This one is sort of half hot. And this one now is cold, 0 degrees. Okay, now here I'll change color. I'll do the design of it first, and then we can put colors in maybe. Got another valve. Some will call it, again, some manufacturers will call it a PISOV. Some will call it a hot air valve, depending on the manufacturer. And I'll take an air where I've left the pack now. And I'll take this cold air into the um, cargo bay in an area called the mixer, in a component called the mixer unit or mixing unit. Mixing unit. Okay, so here I have my cold air, which I pressure regulate. I can't put 35 psi in the cabin, and I can't put 0 degree air in the cabin. In fact, it's so cold that I have to practically heat it up, and that's what I do. So if you can imagine, I take this tube now and I'll make it a bit longer, like that, length of the cabin. And then here is the cabin. Here is the aft area of the cabin, passengers. Here is the middle section, X, and here is the forward. It could be a combination or exclusively for the crew in the cockpit. They have their own selector because they want their own air. So I can't be putting super cold air down here. So I'll change color again just to keep me going. At this area here, I'll bring the air here. But before I get to that, I need to remember we talked about these trim air valves. So these trim air valves will bring in some hot air. Remember, I've got loads of hot air up here. So if I brought wrong color. If I brought here some hot air down here, that's terrible. I'll do it a bit better, guys. I'm gonna get the hang of this. So this is just one of our first ones. If I do it like that, nice hot air going there. Not as high. Then so now got hot air coming all the way down here. We said it's 200 degree, mixing with 0 degree air, and the temperature adjustment is according to, let's give them some names. Premier valve 1, Premier valve 2, Premier valve 3, and these will open or close an amount corresponding to how much we want to alter the temperature and mix hot air with cold air to produce the temperature selected up here. So the computer will think and say, all right, he wants or she wants 20 degrees in the cockpit and 16 degrees in the cabin. So these are adjusted accordingly. These will tell the trim air valves to adjust accordingly and add hot air to the amount to produce the right air at the right pressure to the passengers and the crew. And this is how air conditioning happens. Now, we did say we have here, I'll change color again, make it black. We did say here we have, we've adjusted the temperature. This could also regulate the pressure because we don't want 35 psi of air. It's a lot of air coming through through these ducts, which are very thin and plastic or whatever they're made of. So we can also adjust the pressure here. So after this valve, we'll also have 2 to 3 psi above ambient. So it's just a fresh air sort of blowing, and that's what you have when you open your adjuster on your above your head to get the fresh air. That's the fresh air you get at 2 or 3 psi ambient, which is temperature regulated, which is pressure regulated, which comes in as at a temperature selected by the crew in the cockpit. And that's air conditioning. Okay.